Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown. The Witch in the Old Schoolhouse. I've had many paranormal experiences ever since childhood, though I won't go into great details right now because it would be too much to type. But here is one that is possibly the most interesting, and for me, it was the creepiest. The area where I live has this tiny glen in the forest, and it's about 3 to 5 miles south of my city. It used to have some farms. There were businesses and schools, but most of that has been torn down or just destroyed in one way or the other. It almost seems like whoever goes out there now, that this particular glen has just had bad luck or just really bad, kind of creepy vibes, if you will. The only thing left out there now is actually just a cattle farm, and half a mile away from that is this small memorial site. The memorial site is actually in honor of a one-room schoolhouse that used to be at the base of a big hill near a popular spring that people fish at that's called Rock Springs. This school was actually situated deep in the center of the trees, and it was back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Yes, I know, weird place to put a school. Nobody can figure out why they chose this spot, but that's just what they did. So, in the story of this memorial, uh, this happened in about the year 1900. The schoolhouse was actually burned to the ground. Nobody actually really knows for sure how the fire was started, but there was all kinds of speculation in all the newspaper articles of the time, and we actually found this out in the library. And they said that it was started on purpose by a local farmer and some of his friends, and it was to get revenge on the schoolmaster who they had some kind of disagreement with. The schoolmaster was back then a man in his 30s, and anyway, one day, this farmer and his friends decided to dump some kind of, accelerant on the clapboard of the outside and on the roof, and then they set fire to it. Their intention was actually to just make the schoolmaster jobless by destroying the schoolhouse, so he'd have nothing to do then, and that he would then have to leave the area. Unfortunately, the schoolmaster and many of the young pupils were still inside at the time when the farmer and his group of friends did this, burnt the place down. So being made completely of wood, it just went up like, dry sticks. And though the schoolmaster himself and a few of the older kids managed to get out of the front door, a few of the children who were inside were unable to get out, and thus they died in the fire. From what people who had been alive back then at the time had told other people, a few of my friends' grandparents had told them that their own parents actually remembered this. It was a very tragic, incident, and at least 5 families in the area had to bury their children as a result of the fire. And the local churches even set up support funds to help them all out. And the big hill next to the charred remains of the school was turned into a cemetery specifically for those children. It still is. You can see the graves of the children, and also there were more graves added for decades after that, all the way up to the Vietnam War time. So now, if you go to the school memorial site, you just drive down this dirt road through some cornfields and eventually into the woods that open up into this little glen. To the left of the glen is this small road that goes to the cattle farm. But if you keep going straight over a little bridge, it opens up onto the exact spot in which the school had stood back then. It's just a little grassy knoll, about 100 feet wide or so, with a gravel circle drive around it so that visitors can get out and they can leave flowers or just pay their respects. They get a lot of visitors because of the story. It's actually quite a well-known story. To the right is a very rocky spring called Rock Springs that spans the entire wooded area, and it gave the school its original name, Rock Springs Elementary. All that's left of the actual schoolhouse is some stone foundation and a burned tree stump that had ignited when the actual building caught fire because it was growing so close to the building. So erected above this grassy knoll is this weird kind of huge sign that's made of metal and wire. It's just a really strange thing. I've never really seen anything like it. And it says on it, Rock Springs Elementary School Memorial Site, in these big white letters. It's also got this little metal music notes surrounding the name. So many people question, what's with the music notes, next to the words. But all we can guess at is that the schoolmaster must have liked to teach music to the children, perhaps. Anyway, it's kind of a pretty sign, actually. It's just strange, too. If you walk over a small footbridge to the right of the memorial site that goes over the springs, you then come to the cemetery gate where the children who died in the fire are buried. It's not locked. You can actually lift the latch and go right in. The entire cemetery is on a steep hill. But it's mowed quite often, so many people actually go visiting and it's easy to walk around in there. And here's the other strange thing. There's also a grave that is right in the middle of the cemetery, and it's surrounded by an ornate wrought iron fence. The gravestone that is inside the little fence is broken in half, and you can see some sort of writing was on there. But it looks like it's been sort of scraped away or something. Also, the entire grave inside the fence is really overgrown with some kind of weird, unusual plants and herbs, which looks sort of out of place and strange. Anyway, some people have actually researched that particular grave, and they found out that in actual fact, a person, and it's unclear if it was a man or a woman, was at some point executed by hanging in another nearby town for suspicion of practicing witchcraft and murdering some of the local children. Putting a wrought iron fence around a witch's grave, apparently, and planting certain flowers and unusual plants right over it was a popular method back then of supposedly keeping an evil person or witch's spirit from getting out of the grave. It was the old superstitious stuff that people used to believe. The strange thing is that when our newspaper ran the story after people did some research, it turns out that the witch's grave was there before the town buried the children there. She, or he, had been buried there for at least 10 to 20 years, next to the school. It seems that the townspeople wanted this person just buried alone, completely away from the other cemeteries too. This was a common practice back then when people believed in witchcraft, and there was all this hysteria that surrounded a witch, and the witch wasn't supposed to be buried in a hallowed cemetery where the good Christian people also were, from what I've read and heard. So it sounds like they just wanted some of these people who they considered to be non-Christian, dabbling in the occult or witches or whatever, they wanted those buried completely separate from everybody else. So given all that backstory, you can imagine that this place really over the years has become a hotbed for, paranormal investigators and, teenagers looking for, a fun weekend. So word did get around, and a lot of people have supposedly had this same experience out there too. Um, and the experience kind of goes like this, and this is, quite common. Quite a number of people have experienced this apparently. They would leave their car parked in the little circle drive around the burned foundations of the schoolhouse next to the memorial sign. And they would just go hang out, take pictures in the graveyard, and then they would hear the same thing that apparently a lot of other people have heard, the voices of children laughing and playing. And it was as if they were at recess or something by the sounds of what people were hearing. They'd then run to their car and they would drive off just terrified. A lot of these people would say that when they arrived home, they'd find children's handprints all over their car windows. And a few would talk about how their pictures of the witch's grave would show orbs, lights, or figures over the grave. Now, my high school group of friends and I heard stories, and just like, other teenagers in my city, we all just got in the car one night and we went ghost hunting. Out at the Rock Springs Memorial Site, we're then just kind of hanging out, taking pictures of everything to see if anything shows up, in the photos, and just trying to scare each other and so on. And we did this quite a few times as there wasn't much to do in town after dark. So I will say, though, it did feel strange out there from the get-go. It feels like something is there. Even the staunchest non-believers who went out there just for the hell of it would come back and admit that while nothing much happened, they could feel that there was something strange out there and they wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. Anyway, one evening we decided to take out a new member of our group just to kind of scare him and, show him around and stuff. And we took him out there and we told him the story, and we left the car at the site and we walked him into the cemetery, showed him the witch's grave, took pictures with our digital camera, and he, along with the rest of us, started to get scared. We didn't hear any children's voices ourselves, but we just felt kind of threatened or something. It genuinely did feel as if we were being watched or followed even. So we ran to the car eventually because we just got tired of this feeling, and we went back to one of our houses. Now, I'll never forget later that night what happened. After I got home, I got a phone call from one of my friends who had taken the pictures. She just said, "You need to come over right now." I thought something horrible was happening or had happened. So I drove over. On her computer, she had uploaded the photos. She'd called over most of our friends who had been with us out there, and their faces were just white. They looked really scared, and she showed me the digital pictures on the computer that they had seen. Now, I'm not joking. There were orbs and faces just floating midair over the witch's grave. One face was this kind of green. It was like a vibrant sort of electric green. She pulled up another picture that had no orbs, but there was just a shot of the witch's grave with some bushes in the background. She asked me, "What do you see?" I looked and said, "I don't see anything." She then pointed to the bushes and enlarged the picture. Now, I am not joking here or exaggerating. There was a perfectly complete human skeleton just standing there in the bushes facing the camera. You could see all of it, feet to head, and it was actually quite detailed and clear. There was no mistaking it. I can't explain the sudden surprise and terror, but I actually jumped and screamed. I'm not one to just scream out loud, but that made me. That was all the proof we needed that something really was out there, whether it was the children who died in the fire or the person they hung and buried at the church in charges of witchcraft. I don't know. Anyway, a couple of years later, I decided that my younger sister and her friend were old enough to take a trip to the memorial site. They were 8th grade. They'd heard the stories, seen some of the pictures other people had taken, and begged me to drive them out there. I was about 19 to 20 by then, so I drove them. I parked in the Circle Drive, showed them the sign and the stone foundations of the school. I walked them over to the springs and into the cemetery, and then my sister and her friend, who barely knew me, grabbed my arms and said, "We don't like this. Take us home. Can we go?" I just asked them what was wrong and that I thought you guys wanted to see this. And my sister, who's just, normally not like this, grabbed my arm and kept pulling me, saying, "It feels wrong here. Something feels wrong. It feels like something's here. Please, Deb, let's go. Get us out of here." They were almost just panicking and freaking out. I'd never seen them act like that. I mean, this was no acting or anything. This was real. I could tell by their faces. They weren't just, acting. So I walked them back down the hill, out of the cemetery and over to the Circle Drive, got in the car and just took them home. So we got home, we got out of the car, and my sister and her friend shut the doors on their side. And then my sister and her friend started screaming. I can't figure out what the hell was wrong with them because they were just screaming hysterically with their hands over their mouths and backing away from the car. So I ran round to their side and I looked at the car, and then I see what was scaring them so badly. All over my car were these tiny children's handprints made of some sort of dark, dusty, crumbling matter. I don't know what it was. There were hundreds of them, all over the windows, all over the doors of my dark green, shiny black Skylark. They weren't there before we went out to the site. I just washed my car that afternoon. There was no dust on it. It was pretty much spotless. I walked round the car slowly, inspecting all the exterior. Every window and door on both sides are just covered in these tiny little handprints. They're unmistakable hands of tiny children. The trunk and bumper as well, the fenders, my windshield and hood. There were even a few on the headlights. I put my hands next to them to compare size to see if they could possibly be my handprints. But no way. They were just too small. They were about the size of a preschooler. They were so tiny. Barely the width of the center of my palm. I touched the handprints with my fingers and came away with a gray, powdery substance. I could not figure out what this was. Was it dirt? Was it dried mud? I have no idea. My mom had come out by this time to investigate what the hell was going on, and when she heard the screaming. And once she saw what was on my car, she said, "You are never to take your sister out there again. There is something wrong with that place. Do you understand?" I ran inside and got my digital camera and just began taking pictures of the handprints. As someone who had experienced run-ins with the paranormal since I was a kid, I finally had some kind of proof, and I really wanted to just capture it on camera. I took the camera to my boyfriend's house that night, and he loaded them onto his laptop. He looked at the pictures, and he was just in disbelief. Then he stopped on one picture, and his mouth just hung open, and his face just kind of went white. I asked him what he was looking at, what was wrong, because for a moment I was actually afraid to look. He turned his laptop around and whispered, "Look at the back window." As I write this, I just have goosebumps all over again. Anyway, I looked. It was a picture I'd taken of the passenger side of my car. In the back seat, through the window, you could see the profile from the chest up of a small boy, maybe about 8 years old, sitting in my car. He was completely white. There was no color anywhere on him. Not his clothes or hair, all white. He was sitting facing the front. There was no expression on his face. Really just kind of calm, like he's waiting for someone to drive him somewhere. He had kind of longer hair, like you see on children in pictures from the turn of the century. He had on a white, long-sleeved, button-up shirt with a high collar and suspenders, clothes they wore back then. But his eyes were black. There were no eyeballs, just black space. Oh, God, I don't even want to think too much about it because it's just really terrifying to me. So I just freaked out after seeing that, but what could I do? Sell it? I was just a junior college kid, and that was the only car I could afford at the time. I was stuck with it for a while. That night, my boyfriend and I went out and scraped some of the gray powdery substance of the handprints into some plastic containers with screw-on lids that his mom had used to put her makeup in when she traveled. We wanted to get some of it before it rained or something. He put some of it on paper and poked at it, feeling it with his fingertips. My boyfriend, like me, just couldn't figure it out. He didn't know what this was. He thought maybe it was some kind of dirt or maybe dried mud. It wasn't until a while later when I showed the plastic container of the substance to another friend of mine from college who was very into paranormal research that we figured out what it was. When he smelled it and rubbed it between his fingers and told me what he thought it was, I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. It was so creepy. And it was just too perfect in a way, just amazing. I mean, I remember saying, no way, no, that's just too much, no. He said, Deb, here, rub it between your fingers and smell it. I did. He was right. It was ash from a fire. Suffice it to say, I never went back there again. And as for the photographs, well, I'm not sure what to do with them yet. But I almost am too scared to even want to look at them ever again or show them to anyone. It would certainly be interesting to see the photographs. I believe there are quite a few of them already on the internet, and it's hard to know which ones might be real, which ones could be just fake. But regardless, wow, what an experience! Certainly one of those life-changing things that just happen maybe to a few people in life. We actually get to firsthand experience something very paranormal in such a direct and very, clear way, I guess. I mean, how else could those little handprints have got all over the car? And also the fact that they smell of fire just all kind of ties in with the whole thing. I do wonder what the connection is between the witch and the children and what happened there. Of course, you get a feeling that there is a connection, but it'd be interesting to know more about who that person was that was hung and, buried there, and what they did, exactly what they did, that was, that demanded such a terrible fate. Very interesting story indeed. It followed us. I used to live in a house that was quite seriously haunted. My room must have been the worst place in the house because my siblings and stepdad used to hear and see things, but I got something just about every night, that would happen. There were constant footsteps and the feeling of being watched in that room. Walking through my room, I'd suddenly hit these spots that were really kind of freezing cold. It was like all the typical signs of presence of ghosts and things like this that you hear in movies and you read about. But it got really weird when it started to follow us. And it came with us to our next house. And it got worse to the point that My mom finally believed me when she at one point saw this hand reaching from underneath a door right next to her. And that really terrified her. After 3 weeks of living in that house, at one point my cat just scratched my arm for no reason, and the scratches were really deep. She did this after I picked her up one day, as I normally would, and she had never ever done anything like that before. Anyway, after that, we didn't see her for a week, and we were searching everywhere like crazy. We were really concerned about her. We decided to go back to our old house to see if she was there, and we found her inside the completely shut and locked, boarded up house. It was an old farmhouse, and we ended up getting evicted. And there she was inside a closet upstairs with the door closed on her. And the door even opened outwards, so she couldn't have closed it on herself easily. Lucky for her, she was still alive, but she almost starved to death. From then on, so we went back to the other house again, and everything just kept getting worse. We kept hearing thumping, as if someone was hammering their fist on the walls, and it would wake me up every single night, but always at a different time, too. It would hit the wall 3 times to wake me up. And then, as if to prove that it wasn't my imagination, when I woke up, it would do one more after and stop every night. Same thing. Then we found out that my mom's ex-husband ended up molesting my brother a while after we found out I was alone in my room at night. And I wished that he would die. And I immediately, and I'm not kidding here, I immediately heard this bang on the wall. It turned out that he killed himself within the week. This was all over 7 years ago, and when we left that second house and moved far away, it all suddenly just stopped. My mom broke up with the guy who we lived with because he used to hit me a lot. But earlier this year, I did write up something about all the abuse I went through with that guy, and I posted it online. Anyway, after 5 years of not even seeing him, at the end of the post, I combined his story with the other stepdad I mentioned, who molested my brother, and ended it that he killed himself because that's what the other stepdad did. I wrote the story on March 31st, and the next day I got a text from my mother saying, Sam killed himself last night. No joke. There were a couple of other events that were pretty significant, but I'm just going to keep the story short. So anyway, this ghost just followed us through a couple of houses. And I have reason to believe that it influenced, and I think it was responsible for 2 suicides, and it attempted to kill our cat. Oh, that almost sounds like some kind of demonic thing, some kind of evil spirit, especially when people dying, is associated with, like these, too much coincidence here. These people dying, the cat being found in the previous house, locked up like that. I mean, it just all sounds like something very malicious going on. So probably some kind of demon thing or some evil presence that's got some kind of intelligence going on there, and it's definitely going after you, your family, and you have to be careful what you say too, because sometimes these things will, if you say something negative about someone, like you want someone to die or whatever, these things can literally make that happen. So I wonder if it was somehow attached to you for some reason. Kind of curious idea, isn't it? Or perhaps it was at that first house and then just followed you, sort of latched onto you or something. I don't know. Certainly very terrifying. I'm glad the kitty wasn't hurt in the end, and that you and your family, your mom, got out of there.